You're telling me we're handing over a $200 billion empire to someone who's been here less than a year? The boardroom went deathly silent as the executives stared at the succession documents in disbelief. Just 12 months ago, she was an intern fetching coffee. Today, she was being named CEO. Robert Harrison, 30 years with the company, respected by every employee, architect of their biggest deals, slammed his fist on the mahogany table. This is an insult. An absolute disgrace to everyone who built this company from the ground up. The shareholders would revolt, he shouted. This decision would destroy everything they'd worked for. But then the boardroom doors swung open. 2 federal agents walked in and placed Robert Harrison under arrest. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. The room erupted into chaos. And in that moment of absolute pandemonium, the 26-year-old nobody, the intern they'd all dismissed, stood up and spoke 5 words that turned every executive's blood cold. 5 words that explained everything. 5 words that made half the board break down in tears. What she said next didn't just silence the room. It revealed a truth so devastating, so impossibly brave, that it would change this company, and these people, forever. So what really happened that day? And how did a girl with barely a year of experience end up controlling one of the most powerful corporations in America? The answer begins 3 years earlier, on the day nobody wanted her.
Every story deserves to be heard. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Your voice keeps the past alive.
You're handing over a $200 billion empire to someone who's been here less than a year? The boardroom went deathly silent as the executives stared at the succession documents in disbelief. Just 12 months ago, she was an intern fetching coffee. Today, she was being named CEO. Robert Harrison, 30 years with the company, respected by every employee, architect of their biggest deals, slammed his fist on the mahogany table. This is an insult, he shouted. An absolute disgrace to everyone who built this company from the ground up. The shareholders would revolt. This decision would destroy everything they'd worked for. But then the boardroom doors swung open. 2 federal agents walked in and placed Robert Harrison under arrest. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. The room erupted into chaos. And in that moment of absolute pandemonium, the 26-year-old nobody, the intern they'd all dismissed, stood up and spoke 5 words that turned every executive's blood cold. 5 words that explained everything. 5 words that made half the board break down in tears. I'm Nathaniel Holloway's daughter. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Nathaniel Holloway, the founder, the legend, the man who'd built Sterling Industries from nothing into one of the most powerful corporations in North America. The man who died 3 years ago, leaving behind a company, a fortune, and apparently, a daughter nobody knew existed. My name is Sarah Holloway, and this is the story of how I went from being nobody's daughter to everyone's boss. But more than that, it's the story of how my father saved me twice. Once when I was 3 years old and standing on an auction platform with bleeding feet and a broken teddy bear. And once more, 3 years after his death, when his final plan brought down the criminals who'd tried to destroy everything he built. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened in that boardroom, you need to understand where I came from. And that story begins 23 years earlier, on the hottest day of summer, in a dusty town square where children were being sold like livestock. I don't remember much about my biological mother. Just fragments, really. The smell of lavender soap. Rough hands braiding my hair. A voice singing softly in the dark. Her name was Annie, and she worked herself to death trying to keep me fed. Laundress, seamstress, anything that would pay a few cents. When she died, I was 3 years old, and I had nothing but a torn teddy bear I called Biscuit and a dress that was more holes than fabric. They put me in an orphanage run by a man named Reverend Samuel Whitmore. To the town, he was a pillar of the community, a man of God, a protector of vulnerable children. But behind closed doors, Whitmore was something else entirely. Monster. A businessman who dealt in human suffering. Children weren't souls to be saved in his orphanage. They were commodities to be sold. I learned early not to cry. Crying brought the belt. Crying brought the dark room, a closet so small you couldn't sit down, so black you couldn't see your own hands. I spent hours in that darkness, sometimes days, learning that the world offered me nothing but pain. I learned to be quiet, to be small, to take up as little space as possible, to never ask for anything, never want anything, never expect anything. The scars on my back told the story of what happened when I forgot those lessons. 15 separate beatings, the doctor would later document. Whip marks on a 3-year-old. I still have those scars. I wear them under expensive suits now. Hidden from the world, but they're there. Permanent reminders of what I survived. The auction happened on a Saturday in July. The heat was brutal, pressing down on Silver Creek like punishment from God. I stood on a wooden platform in the town square, barefoot because they'd taken my shoes for the next child. My feet were bleeding from the rough wood. I clutched Biscuit to my chest and stared at nothing, waiting for whatever came next. The auctioneer's voice was hoarse from hours of calling out bids. "Come on folks," he pleaded. "She's the last one. She eats almost nothing. Won't be any burden at all. Just needs a roof and some scraps." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A farmer in the front shook his head. "Too small for any real work," he said. "Be years before she's useful. I ain't running a charity." Another man called out. "What good's a runt like that?" A woman near the back tooted to her husband. "Poor little thing, but we've already got 4 mouths to feed. Can't take on another." "Damaged goods," someone muttered. "You can see it in her eyes. Something's broken in that one." I heard every word. I was 3 years old, and I understood with perfect clarity that nobody wanted me. That I was worthless. That I would be sent back to Whitmore's orphanage, back to the dark room, back to the belt. And I accepted it, because what else could I do? Then boots struck wood. Heavy, deliberate. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, and every head turned. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. His face was weathered from years in the sun. His hands scarred from work. But his eyes, when they met mine, held something I'd never seen before. Not pity. Not disgust. Something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. "Wait," he said. His voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. "Mr. Holloway, did you say something?" The man, Holloway, stepped onto the platform. His long stride ate up the distance between us. I flinched, pressing Biscuit tighter against my chest, but I didn't run. Didn't have anywhere to run to. "How much?" His voice came out rougher than he seemed to intend. "Mr. Holloway, sir, this is highly irregular. A man in your position." Asked how much. The auctioneer's eyes darted to the crowd, then back to Holloway. "The standard placement fee is $5, but..." Holloway pulled out his wallet, counted out $50, 10 times the asking price, and slapped it on the podium. "That should cover the fee and then some," he said. "Papers now." The crowd erupted in whispers. Holloway's lost his mind. What's a bachelor rancher want with a little girl? Ain't natural, a man his age taking in a child like that. But Holloway ignored them all. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with me. Up close, I could see the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard, the weariness that seemed to weigh on his shoulders like a physical thing. "Hey there," he said quietly. "What's your name?" I stared at him without answering. My grip on Biscuit tightened. "That your friend?" He nodded toward the bear. "He got a name." Still nothing. But something flickered in my chest. Not trust exactly. Curiosity maybe. "I'm Nate," he said. "I've got a ranch about 10 miles from here. Lots of horses. You ever seen a horse up close?" The smallest shake of my head. "They're real gentle, most of them. Soft noses. Like to be petted." He reached out slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away, and touched Biscuit's worn head with one finger. Softer than this little fella, even. I looked down at his hand on my bear, then back up at his face, searching. I'd learned to read danger, to assess threats, to survive. And what I saw in Nathaniel Holloway's face wasn't danger. It was something I didn't have a name for yet. "I'm going to pick you up now," he said. "All right. Going to take you somewhere safe. Somewhere with food and a real bed and nobody who will hurt you." I studied him for a long moment. Then, so slightly he almost missed it, I nodded. He scooped me up with a gentleness that surprised both of us. I weighed almost nothing. A bundle of bones and fear wrapped in rags. My small body went rigid in his arms, every muscle tensed for pain that didn't come. "It's okay," he murmured against my matted hair. "You're okay now." That wagon ride changed everything. And what I didn't know then, what I couldn't possibly understand at 3 years old, was that the man carrying me away from that auction platform had his own reasons for saving me. Reasons that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with a grief so deep it had nearly destroyed him. Reasons that would eventually build an empire and change thousands of lives. But first I had to learn what it meant to be loved. And Nathaniel Holloway had to remember. The ranch house was bigger than any building I'd ever been inside. Martha, the woman with flour on her apron and fire in her eyes, led me through rooms that seemed to stretch on forever. Hallways with paintings on the walls. A kitchen that smelled like bread and cinnamon. Stairs that creaked under our feet. But what I remember most clearly was the silence. Not the oppressive silence of Whitmore's orphanage, where children learned to be quiet or suffer. This was different, peaceful. The kind of silence that wraps around you like a blanket instead of suffocating you like a hand over your mouth. Nate carried me upstairs while Martha hurried ahead, muttering about hot water and clean clothes and what kind of monster lets a child's feet bleed like that. I kept my face pressed against Nate's shoulder, breathing in the unfamiliar scent of him. Leather and horses and something else. Something that smelled like safety, though I didn't have a word for it yet. "This is yours," Nate said, setting me down gently in a doorway. The room beyond was small but bright. A bed with a patchwork quilt. A dresser. A window that looked out over fields where horses grazed in the fading sunlight. All of it. Nobody else's. I stood frozen, unable to process what he was saying. "Mine." The word felt foreign in my mouth. "Yours," he confirmed. I took one tentative step inside, then another. My bare feet left small bloody prints on the wooden floor, but neither Nate nor Martha said anything about it. I touched the quilt with one finger, expecting it to disappear. When it didn't, I looked back at them with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Biscuit too." I clutched my bear tighter. "Biscuit too," Nate said, and something in his voice cracked just slightly. Martha appeared with a basin of warm water and clean cloths. "Let's get those feet looked at, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentler than I'd heard any adult use. "Then we'll find you something clean to wear." But when she moved toward me, I scrambled backward, pressing myself into the corner. My heart hammered against my ribs. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. "No touching. No touching, please." Martha froze immediately, her hands raised where I could see them. "It's all right, honey. I won't touch you if you don't want me to. But those feet need cleaning or they'll get infected." I shook my head violently, my whole body trembling. In my experience, adults who wanted to clean you were adults who hurt you first. The bath at the orphanage had been a weekly torture session. Cold water. Harsh soap that burned. Rough hands that scrubbed until you bled. "What if," Nate said quietly from the doorway, "what if we let you do it yourself? Martha can show you how, but you do the washing. Would that be okay?" I looked between them, searching for the trap. When I didn't find one, I nodded slowly. What followed was the strangest, gentlest experience of my young life. Martha set the basin on the floor and showed me how to dip the cloth in the warm water, how to squeeze it out, how to clean the cuts on my feet without pressing too hard. She talked the whole time, her voice low and soothing, telling me about the ranch and the horses and the apple tree behind the house that would have fruit come fall. Nate stood in the doorway the entire time, a silent sentinel. Not hovering, not threatening, just present. And when I looked up at him once, scared I was doing something wrong, he smiled. A small, sad smile that somehow made me feel safer than I'd ever felt in my life. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Martha said when I finished. "Now let's get you into something clean." She produced a nightgown, soft and white and far too big for me. It had belonged to a neighbor's daughter, she explained, who'd outgrown it. I changed in the corner, my back to them, hyper-aware of the scars I knew they could see, waiting for the questions, the disgust, the judgment, but none came. When I turned around, drowning in fabric that pooled around my feet, Martha just smiled and said, "Perfect. Now you look like a proper ranch girl." Nate cleared his throat. "Martha made soup," he said. "You hungry?" He nodded. I was always hungry. Hunger was a constant companion, a gnawing ache I'd learned to ignore. Downstairs in the kitchen, Martha ladled steaming soup into a bowl and set it in front of me with a thick slice of bread. I stared at it for a long moment, unable to believe it was real, unable to believe it was mine. "Go on," Nate said gently, sitting across from me. "It's for you." I ate like a starving animal, barely chewing, stuffing food into my mouth as fast as I could swallow, watching the door, watching their faces, waiting for someone to take it away. "Slow down, little one," Nate said, touching my arm lightly. "Nobody's going to take it from you. There's plenty more where that came from." I froze, a spoonful of soup halfway to my mouth, staring at him with naked disbelief. "I promise," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Eat all you want. If you're still hungry after, Martha will make you more." Something shifted inside me. Something small and fragile, like the first crack in a frozen lake. I set the spoon down, picked it up again, took a slower bite, then another, testing whether this promise was real. When I finally finished, my stomach uncomfortably full for the first time in memory, Martha asked if I wanted more. I shook my head, terrified that saying yes would reveal me as the greedy, worthless thing everyone said I was. But Nate seemed to understand. He didn't push, just nodded and said, "Any time you're hungry, you tell Martha or me. Day or night. Understand?" I nodded, though I didn't really understand. Didn't understand a world where food was freely given, where asking didn't result in punishment. That night, after Martha had tucked me into bed and left the lamp burning low like she promised, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every sound made me jump. Every creak of the old house sent my heart racing. I waited for the door to open, for heavy footsteps, for the pain I knew was coming because pain always came. But it didn't. Instead, I heard low voices downstairs. Nate and Martha talking. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. The scars on her back. Nate's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "Did you see them?" "I saw them," Martha replied, her own voice hard. 15 at least. Maybe more. "That's not discipline, Nate. That's torture." "She's 3 years old," Nate said, and I could hear him pacing. "Bree. What kind of monster does that to a child?" "The kind we need to destroy," Martha said flatly. "But not tonight. Tonight, that baby needs rest and safety and the knowledge that this is different. You understand me? You can't go charging after Whitmore with vengeance in your heart. Not when she needs you here." There was a long pause. Then Nate said, quietly, "She called her bear Biscuit." "What? Her bear?" "His name is Biscuit. Her mother gave it to her before she died." "Oh, Nate," Martha's voice softened. "That poor baby." "She asked me if I was lonely," Nate continued. "A 3-year-old child asked me if I was lonely. 'Cause she knows what that feels like. Because she's lived her entire life being unwanted." "Well, she's wanted now," Martha said firmly. "Wanted and safe and home. That's what matters. The rest we'll figure out as we go." I crept back to bed, my heart pounding for a different reason now. They'd seen the scars. They knew what had been done to me. And instead of sending me back, instead of deciding I was too damaged, too much trouble, they wanted to destroy the people who'd hurt me. I didn't have a word for what I was feeling. Didn't understand the complicated mix of fear and hope and desperate, terrifying need that was blossoming in my chest. But I clutched Biscuit tighter and whispered into his worn fur, "Maybe this one's different. Maybe this one keeps his promises." And for the first time in my life, I let myself believe it might be true. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of bacon frying downstairs. For a moment I forgot where I was. Panic seized me. Had I overslept? Would Whitmore put me in the dark room? Would there be a beating? Then I saw the patchwork quilt, the window, biscuit tucked under my arm. And I remembered the auction, the promise of safety. I crept downstairs, following the sounds and smells to the kitchen. Martha stood at the stove, her back to me. Nate sat at the table reading a newspaper, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. "Well, good morning, sunshine," Martha said without turning around. "Hungry?" I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. "Yes, ma'am," I whispered. "No, ma'am, necessary," Martha said, turning with a smile. "Just Martha. And you, young lady, are just in time for breakfast." She set a plate in front of me. Eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam. More food than I'd seen in weeks at the orphanage. I stared at it, overwhelmed. "Something wrong?" Nate asked, lowering his paper. I shook my head quickly, terrified they'd take it away if I complained. "Too much." "Nonsense," Martha said. "A growing girl needs a proper breakfast. Eat what you can. Whatever's left, the ranch hands will finish." I ate slowly this time, mindful of what Nate had said the night before. And as I ate, I watched them. Watched the way Martha hummed while she cooked. The way Nate turned the pages of his newspaper with rough, scarred hands. The easy silence between them. The lack of tension, of fear, of violence waiting to explode. This was what normal looked like, I realized. This was what safety felt like. And some small, broken part of me started to believe I might be allowed to stay. After breakfast, Nate asked if I wanted to see the horses. I nodded eagerly, forgetting to be scared for a moment. I'd never seen a real horse up close before. The barn was huge and dim and smelled like hay and leather and animals. Horses stood in stalls, some munching peacefully, others watching us with large, intelligent eyes. Nate led me to a stall at the end where a mare stood with a newborn foal. "This is Honey," Nate said quietly. "Had her baby 2 days ago." I pressed against the stall door, mesmerized. The foal was all legs and curiosity, stumbling around on unsteady feet. Its coat was golden, catching the light that filtered through the barn windows. "Want to touch her?" Nate asked. Tiniest nod. He opened the stall door carefully, spoke softly to Honey, then lifted me up. The foal sniffed at my outstretched hand, its nose soft and warm against my palm. "Soft," I breathed. "Real soft." "Real soft," Nate agreed. His voice had a quality I didn't recognize yet. Something warm and full and almost breaking. "What's her name?" I asked. "Don't have one yet," Nate said. "Maybe you could help me think of one." I considered this seriously, feeling the weight of the responsibility. "Buttercup," I said finally. "Buttercup," Nate repeated, setting me down gently. "Like it. Buttercup it is." I beamed up at him, and for just a second I forgot to be afraid. Forgot to be broken. I was just a little girl naming a baby horse, and that was enough. That afternoon, the nightmares I'd been holding at bay finally caught up with me. I fell asleep on the porch in the warm sun, exhausted from my first full night's sleep in years. And the dreams came. Dark rooms, leather belts, Reverend Whitmore's voice saying damaged goods, saying worthless, saying nobody wants you. Hands grabbing, pain exploding across my back. The smell of the dark room, that closet where bad children went to learn. I woke up screaming. Nate was there before I'd even opened my eyes, kneeling beside me. His hands hovering but not touching. Hey, it's okay. You're safe. You're at the ranch. Nobody's going to hurt you." But I couldn't stop screaming. Couldn't stop thrashing. Caught between the nightmare and reality, unable to tell which was which. "Sarah," Nate said, using my name for the first time. "Sarah, look at me. Open your eyes and look at me." I forced my eyes open. Found his face. Those dark eyes steady and sure. "That's it," he said softly. "You're okay. You had a bad dream, but you're okay now. You're safe. Promise you're safe." Slowly, painfully, I came back to myself. The screaming stopped. The thrashing stilled. But I couldn't stop shaking. "Can you tell me about it?" Nate asked gently. "Sometimes talking helps." "The dark room," I whispered. He put me in the dark room. I was bad. You weren't bad, Nate's voice was fierce. Whatever they told you, it was a lie. You were never bad. They were bad. They were wrong. Not you. Never you. But I was, I insisted, desperately needing him to understand. Talked too much. Asked for water. I didn't work fast enough. I was bad, so they punished me. No, Nate said, and his voice cracked. No, sweetheart. Asking for water isn't bad. Talking isn't bad. Being a child isn't bad. What they did to you was evil. What they did was wrong. And I swear to you on everything I have that will never happen here. There is no dark room. There are no beatings. There is only safety and food and a bed that's yours for as long as you want it. I stared at him, wanting so desperately to believe him. But 3 years of torture had taught me that adults lied. That promises meant nothing. That hope was just another word for pain waiting to happen. How do I know? I whispered. How do I know you won't hurt me? You don't, Nate admitted. Not yet. But I'm going to show you. Every single day. Until you believe it. And in that moment something fundamental shifted. Because he didn't try to convince me with words. Didn't make grand promises. Didn't tell me I was being silly or dramatic. He just acknowledged my fear and promised to prove himself through action. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. And it was exactly what I needed to hear. The first week at the ranch passed in a blur of new experiences and old fears. I followed Nate everywhere like a shadow, always 3 steps behind, always watching. When he turned too quickly, I flinched. When he raised his voice to call across the yard to Jake, the ranch foreman, I disappeared behind the nearest door. When Martha reached out to brush hair from my face, I ducked away so fast I nearly fell. They were patient, impossibly patient, but I could see the way it hurt them, watching me live in constant terror. The way Martha's eyes filled with tears when I apologized for breathing too loud. The way Nate's jaw clenched when I asked permission to use the bathroom. You don't need permission, he told me gently on the 3rd day. This is your home. You can eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, use the bathroom whenever you need. You understand. I nodded, but I didn't understand. Not really. In my world, everything required permission. Everything was earned or stolen or punished. The nightmares came every night without fail. Dark rooms and belts and Whitmore's voice telling me I was worthless. Sometimes I woke up screaming. Sometimes I woke up silent, tears streaming down my face. But every time Nate was there within seconds. Never touching unless I reached for him first. Never overwhelming me. Just present. A steady voice in the darkness reminding me where I was. That I was safe. That morning would come. On the 4th night, he found me not in bed, but huddled in the corner of my room, biscuit pressed against my face, my body curled as small as possible. Rosie, he said quietly. He'd started calling me Rosie, a nickname I'd mentioned once in passing. What happened? Thunder, I whispered. The sound of it rolling across the prairie had woken me, sending me spiraling into panic. Sounds like him. Like the man with the belt. Nate went very still. What man, sweetheart? But I couldn't say more. Couldn't force the words past the terror closing my throat. I just pressed myself further into the corner, trying to disappear. He sat down on the floor beside me, not touching, just present. The thunder can't hurt you, he said quietly. It's just noise. Big loud noise, but that's all it is. He said that too, I whispered. Before he hurt me. I'm not him, Nate's voice was steady despite the rage I could hear underneath. I will never hurt you, Rosie. Never. You understand. How do I know? The question came out broken. How do I know you won't? You don't, he admitted. Not yet. But I'm going to show you every single day. And maybe one day you'll believe me. The thunder cracked again, closer this time. I flinched but didn't hide my face. Can you stay? I asked, my voice barely audible. I'll stay as long as you need. He stayed until dawn, his back against the wall, while I eventually drifted off with my head against his arm. When Martha found us there in the morning, she had to turn away to hide her tears. On the 5th day everything changed. Martha's grandson arrived for a summer visit. Tommy was 10 years old, all energy and noise and enthusiasm. He burst through the front door like a small tornado, shouting for his grandmother. He vanished. 1 second I was in the kitchen helping Martha snap beans, the next I was gone. Where'd she go? Tommy looked around, confused. Grandma said there was a little girl. You scared her, Nate said, already heading for the stairs. Stay here. He found me under my bed, pressed against the wall, trembling. Rosie, he said gently, lying down on his stomach so he could see me. It's okay. That's just Tommy. He's loud, but he's harmless. He yelled, I whispered. He's excited, Nate explained. Boys his age are like that. They don't always know how to use indoor voices. Is he going to stay? For the summer, yes. My whole body tensed. Boy. In the house. Boys at the orphanage had been the worst. Cruel and violent, taking out their own pain on anyone smaller. Hey, Nate's voice was soft but firm. Look at me, Rosie. Look at me. I met his eyes in the dim space under the bed. Nobody in this house will hurt you, he said. Not me, not Martha, not Tommy. Promise you. But if he does anything at all that scares you, you come find me immediately. Understand? I nodded slowly. Will you come out? We can go meet him together. I'll be right there the whole time. After a long moment, I crawled out from under the bed. Nate scooped me up, and for the first time I didn't go rigid in his arms. Instead, I leaned into him, my face pressed against his neck, drawing strength from his steady presence. The introduction went better than I'd expected. Tommy, under strict instructions from Martha, approached me like I was a skittish horse. He crouched down to my level, keeping his movements slow and his voice quiet. Hi, he said. I'm Tommy. I'm 10. What's your name? I pressed closer to Nate's leg but managed to answer. Rosie. That's a nice name, Tommy smiled. You ever seen baby horses before? Tiniest nod. Oh, you want to come see Buttercup with me? She's getting bigger every day. I looked up at Nate, seeking permission. Go ahead, he said. I'll be right here if you need me. I hesitated, then took Tommy's offered hand. His palm was warm and slightly sweaty, nothing threatening. He led me toward the barn, chattering about horses and summer and everything a 10-year-old found interesting. By the end of the day, Tommy had coaxed something out of me that Nate and Martha hadn't managed yet. He'd made me laugh. A small, rusty sound like something that hadn't been used in too long, but real. Genuine. Nate heard it from across the yard and had to sit down, his chest tight with emotions he'd thought long dead. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings with Martha in the kitchen, learning to cook simple things. Afternoons with Tommy, playing in the barn or feeding carrots to the horses. Evenings with Nate on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains while he told me stories about the ranch, about his life, about everything except the pain I could see he carried. He never asked about my scars. Never pushed for details about the orphanage. But slowly, in pieces, the story came out. Little confessions whispered in the dark after nightmares. Fragments offered while we sat with the horses. The truth of what Reverend Whitmore had done, not just to me, but to dozens of children over the years. Nate listened to every word with a face like carved stone. And I could see the rage building behind his eyes, the desire for vengeance. But he never let it spill over onto me. Never made me feel like my trauma was a burden. He just held it, bore the weight of it, and promised me over and over that I was safe now. On the 7th day, Dr. Eleanor Grant came to the ranch. She was a rarity in Montana, a female physician who'd come west after her husband died. Most of the town's men refused to see her, but the women swore by her skills. And when Nate explained the situation, explained about the scars and the fear and the need for documentation, she agreed to come immediately. But when Nate tried to explain it to me, I panicked. No doctors, I said, backing away. No looking. No touching. Rosie, she's very gentle. She won't hurt you. They always say that. I was shaking now, my voice rising. They always say gentle and then they're not. Nate crouched down, making himself small and non-threatening. Can you tell me why you're so afraid of doctors? The silence stretched between us. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, I said, "They look at the bad parts." "What bad parts?" "The parts that make you dirty." My voice was hollow. "The parts that make people not want you." Nate's face went pale. "Rosie, sweetheart, there's nothing dirty about you. Nothing." "The other doctor said there was." I looked up at him, my eyes swimming with tears. "The orphanage." He looked at my back and said I was damaged goods. Said nobody would want a broken thing like me. Pure rage flashed across Nate's face, quickly controlled. "That doctor was wrong," he managed through gritted teeth. "Dead wrong. You're not broken, Rosie. You're not damaged. You're perfect." "Then why do they hurt me?" The question hung in the air like poison. Nate didn't have an answer. There was no answer that could make sense of adults beating a 3-year-old child. "Because they were evil," he said finally. "'Cause something was wrong with them, not you. You didn't do anything to deserve what happened." "Nothing." I studied his face for a long moment. "The lady doctor, is she nice?" "Think so," Nate said honestly. "But you don't have to see her if you don't want to." "Will it help?" Looking at my bad parts. God, it killed him when I called them that. "It might help us fight the bad man. The one who wants to take you away." I didn't know then what he meant. Didn't understand that Whitmore was already making moves to reclaim me, that there were legal battles brewing. I just knew that this examination might help keep me safe. I stood up, brushed imaginary dust from my dress, and lifted my chin with a determination that broke Nate's heart. "Okay," I said. "She can look. But you have to stay." "I'll stay as long as you need me." The examination was brutal to watch, Nate told me later. Dr. Grant was gentle, truly gentle, but every time she touched me I flinched. Every time she asked me to move or turn, my body went rigid with fear. But I didn't cry, didn't scream. Just held Nate's hand in a death grip and stared at the wall. When Dr. Grant saw my back, her professional composure cracked. "Jesus Christ," she breathed. "How old are these?" "Some are months old," Nate said through gritted teeth. "Some are newer." Dr. Grant's hands trembled as she documented each scar, each mark. "There are at least 15 separate incidents here," she said, her voice thick. "Different stages of healing. This wasn't punishment. This was torture." "Can you prove it came from the orphanage?" Nate asked. "I can prove it didn't happen on your ranch." Dr. Grant looked at him with fire in her eyes. "The oldest scars predate your custody by months. This child was being beaten regularly, Mr. Holloway. By someone with access to a belt or strap. Someone in a position of authority. Whitmore. Or someone working for him." Dr. Grant closed her bag. "I'll have my report ready within the week. And Mr. Holloway, whatever happens, I want you to know you saved this child's life." After Dr. Grant left, I sat in Nate's lap, exhausted and trembling. "Did I do good?" "Yes. You did so good, sweetheart. So brave." "Will it help?" "Think so. Hope so." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Papa." Nate's breath caught. I'd called him that before in my sleep, but never deliberately. Never with such intention. "Yes, sweetheart. If the bad man wins," I started, my voice small but steady. "If he takes me back, will you remember me?" His arms tightened around me. "Nobody's going to win except us." "But if they do," I persisted. "If they take me back, will you remember that I was happy here? That I had a papa and a horse and cookies whenever I wanted?" Nate couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. This tiny child, preparing for happiness to be stolen, needing to know that somewhere, someone would remember she'd had it, even briefly. "I'll remember," he whispered finally. "But it won't come to that. I swear to you." But even as he made that promise, even as he held me close and tried to project certainty, a cold fear was growing in his chest. Because 2 days earlier, a letter had arrived. Official. Legal. From Reverend Whitmore's attorney. They were coming for me. And Nate had 2 weeks to figure out how to stop them. The letter sat on Nate's desk like a coiled snake. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I'd learned long ago to pay attention to the things adults tried to hide. Their whispered conversations. Their worried glances. The way Martha's hands shook slightly when she poured coffee. The way Nate stared out the window for long stretches, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. Something was wrong, something big. And it had to do with me. I found the letter 3 days after Dr. Grant's visit. I'd been looking for Nate to show him a drawing I'd made of Buttercup, and his office door was open. The paper lay on top of a pile of other documents, official-looking with fancy letterhead. I couldn't read all the words. I was only 3, and my education at the orphanage had consisted mostly of learning to scrub floors and stay quiet. But I knew some letters, and I knew my name when I saw it. Sarah Miller. My legal name, the one from before I became Rosie. And I knew the word that appeared again and again throughout the document. Return. 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 They wanted me back. My hands started shaking. The paper fluttered to the floor. I heard footsteps in the hallway and ran, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short gasps. I made it to my room and dove under the bed, my safe space, my hiding place. That's where Nate found me 10 minutes later. Rosie. His voice was gentle, concerned. Sweetheart, Martha said you ran past her looking scared. What happened? I couldn't answer. Couldn't force words past the terror closing my throat. I heard him sigh, heard him lower himself to the floor. Then his face appeared at the edge of the bed, level with mine in the dim space underneath. Did you see the letter? He asked quietly. The question surprised me. I'd expected him to be angry, to punish me for snooping. But his voice held only sadness. He nodded. Can you come out so we can talk about it? Are you sending me back? The question came out broken, desperate. And the look on Nate's face, the absolute devastation, told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. No, he said fiercely. Never. Not while I have breath in my body. But the letter said. I know what the letter said, Nate interrupted. Reverend Whitmore is trying to claim the adoption wasn't legal. That I didn't have proper authority to take you from that auction. He's demanding you be returned to his orphanage pending a hearing. A hearing. Like a trial, Nate explained. Where a judge decides what happens to you. But Rosie listened to me. Look at me. I met his eyes in the darkness under the bed. I am going to fight this with everything I have, he said. Every dollar. Every favor. Every ounce of strength. You are my daughter now, and I will not let them take you. Do you understand? But what if you lose? The question was barely a whisper. Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, if I lose in court, we run. We go somewhere Whitmore can't find us. Canada, maybe. Or California. We start over with new names, new lives. But one way or another, you are not going back to that place. Promise you. It was a reckless promise. An illegal promise. But it was exactly what I needed to hear. I crawled out from under the bed and into his arms, and he held me while I cried. Not the silent tears I'd learned at the orphanage, but real sobs that shook my whole body. Grief and fear and relief all tangled together. When I finally calmed down, Nate carried me downstairs. Martha had hot chocolate waiting, made with extra sugar and topped with cream. We sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, and they explained what was going to happen. A lawyer named William Hart was coming to help, Martha said. He was young but smart, and he'd been building a case against Whitmore for years. There would be a hearing in 2 weeks. Nate would have to prove he could provide a good home for me. That I was better off with him than in Whitmore's orphanage. And I might have to testify. Might have to stand in front of a judge and tell what happened to me. The thought terrified me. But when I looked at Nate's face, at the determination there, at the love, I found courage I didn't know I had. I'll do it, I said. I'll tell them. I'll tell them about the dark room and the belt and everything. If it helps us win. You're the bravest person I know, Nate said. His voice thick with emotion. William Hart arrived the next day. He was younger than I expected, maybe 25, with wire-rimmed glasses and an earnest face. He sat at our kitchen table with papers spread everywhere, making notes while Nate and Martha talked. I listened from my spot under the table, where I'd taken to hiding when strangers visited. It made me feel safer, being able to see without being seen. The problem is precedent, William was saying. In Montana Territory, single men rarely get custody of children, especially young girls. The court will question your motives, your ability to provide proper care. I have Martha, Nate argued. She's here every day. A housekeeper isn't the same as a mother in the court's eyes, William said gently. They'll argue Rosie needs a woman's influence. A traditional family structure. Then I'll get married, Nate said flatly. The words fell into silence. I held my breath under the table. Nate, Martha said carefully. You can't marry someone just to win a custody case. Watch me. That's not how marriage works, William said. Besides, it would take time to court someone, plan a wedding. We have 2 weeks. Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then what do? We build the strongest case we can, William said. We have Dr. Grant's medical report documenting abuse. We'll get testimonies from the ranch hands about Rosie's improvement since coming here. We'll show the judge that you've provided food, shelter, medical care, education. It won't be enough, Nate said. Will it? William hesitated. Honestly, I don't know. Whitmore has powerful friends. The sheriff, town councilman. Half the county owes him favors. But we have truth on our side. Sometimes that's enough. And if it's not, then we find another way, William said firmly. I didn't come to Silver Creek to watch children suffer. One way or another, we'll protect Rosie. I crawled out from under the table then, unable to stay hidden any longer. 3 sets of eyes turned to me, startled. I want to help, I said. Tell me how to help. Nate pulled me onto his lap. You already are helping, sweetheart. Just by being brave. Just by being you. But over the next few days, it became clear I would need to do more. William needed to know everything about my time at the orphanage. Every detail, no matter how painful. It was the only way to show the judge how bad things had been. How much better my life was now. So I told them. Sitting at the kitchen table with Martha holding one hand and Nate holding the other, I described the dark room, the beatings, the starvation, the other children who disappeared in the night, sold to families who wanted workers, not sons or daughters. I told them about Mary, a 7-year-old who'd been taken by a couple from Helena. How she'd left happy, thinking she was getting a family, and how I'd overheard Whitmore laughing about the $50 he'd gotten for her. I told them about the doctor who examined us once a year, who wrote down our injuries but never asked how we got them, who called us damaged goods and broken things. And I told them about Mrs. Harriet Price, a widow who came to the orphanage sometimes. How she'd look at us with calculating eyes, selecting children the way you'd select livestock. How 3 girls had gone home with her over the years, and none of them were ever heard from again. William wrote everything down, his face getting paler with each revelation. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at Nate. This is bigger than we thought, he said. This isn't just one corrupt reverend. This is a network, system. We're talking about human trafficking. Can we prove it? Nate asked. Not in 2 weeks, William admitted. But maybe we don't need to. Maybe exposing Whitmore is enough to cast doubt on his credibility. What do you need? Witnesses, William said. Other victims willing to testify. Financial records showing money changing hands. Anything that proves these children weren't being adopted. They were being sold. Over the next week, William worked tirelessly. He interviewed former orphans, now adults, who remembered being beaten or sold. He tracked down financial irregularities in Whitmore's records. He built a case brick by brick. But Whitmore wasn't sitting idle. 3 days before the hearing, Reverend Samuel Whitmore himself came to the ranch. I was in the barn with Tommy when I heard the shouting. We ran to the house and found Nate standing on the porch, blocking the door, his face like thunder. Below him stood Whitmore, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize. Mr. Holloway. Whitmore's voice was smooth, reasonable. I thought perhaps we could discuss this situation like civilized men. There's nothing to discuss, Nate's voice was ice. The child needs proper care, Whitmore continued. Proper guidance. Surely you can see that a bachelor rancher can't provide what a young girl needs. And what does a young girl need, Reverend? To be sold to the highest bidder. To be beaten until she's afraid of her own shadow. Something flickered in Whitmore's eyes. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. The scars on her back say otherwise. Silence fell. Tommy pulled me back behind the barn door, but I could still see, still hear. That child came to me damaged, Whitmore said finally. Whatever happened to her occurred before she entered my care. Convenient, Nate said. It's the truth. Whitmore stepped closer, his voice dropping. Mr. Holloway, let me be frank. You have no wife, no family, no standing in this community. You've isolated yourself for years. Now you expect people to believe you're suited to raise a child. I don't care what people believe. You should, Whitmore said. Because in 3 days, a judge will decide whether you're fit to keep that girl. And I promise you my testimony will be thorough. Nate stepped forward until they were nearly chest to chest. Threaten me all you want, Reverend. Come after me with everything you've got. But know this. If you try to take that little girl, I will burn your whole operation to the ground. Every crooked deal. Every missing child. Every cent you've taken from suffering families. Whitmore's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. Try me. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Whitmore stepped back, adjusting his collar with shaking hands. I see we understand each other, he said. We do, Nate replied. I'll see you at the hearing, Reverend. Whitmore left, his hired men following. But as they rode away, I saw him look back at the barn, his eyes scanning. For a terrifying second, his gaze locked with mine. And the smile that crossed his face made my blood run cold. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like Whitmore coming to take me back. Finally, I gave up and crept to Nate's room, standing in the doorway until he woke up. Can't sleep? He asked, his voice rough from rest. I shook my head. He pulled back the covers on the other side of the bed. Come on. I climbed in, and he tucked the blankets around me. We lay in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Horses moving in the barn. Wind in the eaves. The distant call of an owl. Papa. I whispered. Yes, sweetheart. What happens if we lose? He was quiet for so long I thought he'd fallen back asleep. Then he said, we won't lose. But what if? Rosie, he turned to face me in the darkness. Listen to me. That man downstairs today. He's scared. He came here trying to intimidate me because he knows his secrets are coming out. He knows what we have on him. And scared men make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind that get them caught, Nate said. William is good at what he does. And we have something Whitmore doesn't. What? The truth, Nate said simply. And people who care about doing what's right. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to have his faith. But I'd seen too much of the world to think truth and justice always won. Still, I snuggled closer to him, drawing comfort from his steady heartbeat. And eventually, surrounded by warmth and safety, I drifted off to sleep. I didn't know then that Whitmore had already made his first mistake. That he'd shown his hand by coming to the ranch, by revealing how desperate he was. That William was even now receiving a letter from a young woman named Sarah Miller, 18 years old, who'd spent 6 years in Whitmore's orphanage and was ready to tell everything she knew. I didn't know that the case William was building was stronger than any of us realized. That the evidence of Whitmore's crimes was piling up, piece by damning piece. All I knew was that in 3 days, everything would be decided. In 3 days, I would either get to stay with the man who'd become my father, or I'd be dragged back to hell. And nothing in my short life had prepared me for that kind of uncertainty. Sarah Miller arrived at the ranch 2 days before the hearing. She was 18 years old, thin as a rail, with haunted eyes that reminded me sickeningly of my own reflection. She came alone, carrying nothing but a small bag and a determination that seemed to burn in her bones. I watched from the porch as she climbed down from the hired wagon, her hands shaking as she paid the driver. When she turned toward the house, our eyes met. And something passed between us. Recognition. Understanding. The silent acknowledgement of shared trauma. Mr. Holloway. Her voice was steady despite the fear I could see in her face. I'm Sarah Miller. I wrote to Mr. Hart. Come inside, Nate said, his voice gentle. You're safe here. Over the next hour, sitting at our kitchen table with Martha pressing tea into her hands, Sarah told her story. It spilled out like poison finally being drained from a wound. She'd been at Whitmore's orphanage from age 8 to 14. 6 years of beatings and starvation and systematic abuse. But the physical violence wasn't the worst part, she said. The worst part was watching children disappear. Pretty girls mostly, Sarah's voice shook but didn't stop. Young ones. Families would come look us over like livestock. Pay Whitmore and take us away. We thought they were being adopted. But they weren't. William Hart leaned forward, his pen poised over his notepad. No, Sarah met his eyes. I had a friend, Mary. She was 7. A couple from Helena paid $50 for her, and she went away happy, thinking she was getting a family. What happened to her? Martha's voice was barely a whisper. I saw her 2 years later in Helena, Sarah said. Working in a brothel. She didn't recognize me, or pretended not to. The room went deathly silent. I sat frozen in my chair, not fully understanding but knowing it was something terrible, something that could have happened to me. And Mrs. Price? Nate asked quietly. Sarah's face went pale. She took 3 girls while I was there. Said she needed household help. She paused, her hands tightening around her teacup. None of them ever came back. None of them ever wrote. They just disappeared. Would you testify to this? William asked. In court. That's why I'm here. Sarah lifted her chin, a spark of defiance breaking through the fear. I heard what you did at that auction, Mr. Holloway. How you saved that little girl. She looked at me, and her eyes were wet with unshed tears. Nobody ever saved us. Nobody ever even tried. You're brave to come forward, Nate said. I'm terrified, Sarah admitted. Whitmore has friends everywhere. If he finds out I talked. Stay here at the ranch until the hearing's over, Martha interrupted. This house has plenty of room, and nobody threatens a guest under my roof. Sarah stayed. And over the next 2 days, she and I formed an unexpected bond. She understood what I'd been through in a way even Nate and Martha couldn't. She knew the smell of the dark room, the sound of the belt, the desperate arithmetic of figuring out how to be small enough, quiet enough, good enough to avoid punishment. On the night before the hearing, I found her sitting on the porch in the dark, staring out at the stars. Can't sleep? I asked, climbing up to sit beside her. Too many memories, Sarah said. Being this close to Silver Creek again, knowing I'll see him tomorrow. It's bringing it all back. We sat in silence for a while. Then I asked, do you think we'll win? Sarah looked at me for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know. The world isn't fair, Rosie. It wasn't fair to us, and it won't magically become fair just because we want it to. Then why testify? Why risk it? Because maybe, just maybe, we can stop it from happening to someone else. Sarah's voice was fierce. Because every child who comes after us deserves better than what we got. And because that man down there, she nodded toward where light spilled from Nate's office window. He chose you when nobody else would. The least I can do is help him keep you. I looked at the office window, at Nate's silhouette bent over papers, still working, still fighting. Papa's scared, I said quietly. He tries to hide it, but I can tell. Of course he's scared, Sarah said. He's about to go to war for you. That's what love looks like, Rosie. It's being terrified but doing it anyway. The morning of the hearing dawned hot and merciless. I woke before sunrise, my stomach in knots. Martha had laid out my best dress, white with blue flowers, freshly pressed. She'd braided my hair the night before, and it hung in neat plaits down my back. Do I look pretty? I asked, spinning for Nate at breakfast. I could barely eat, but Martha had insisted I try. Prettiest girl in Montana, Nate said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Pretty enough to keep. The question gutted him. I could see it in his face. Rosie, he crouched down to my level. No matter what happens today, you are worth keeping. You understand me. This isn't about whether you're good enough. This is about grown-ups fighting over something that should never have been in question. But what if the judge doesn't like me? Then the judge is an idiot, Nate said firmly. And we'll figure out another way. The wagon ride into town was silent. Martha sat with me in the back, holding my hand. Sarah followed on a borrowed horse, pale but determined. Tommy had wanted to come, but Martha had forbidden it, saying a courthouse was no place for a 10-year-old boy. The courthouse was packed when we arrived. Half the town had turned out, some curious, some supportive, most just hungry for spectacle. I could hear them whispering as we walked past. There he is, the one who bought that orphan girl like she was livestock. Shameful. A bachelor living alone with a child. What kind of example is that? I heard the girl's got scars all over her back. What was Whitmore doing to those children? Nate's hand tightened on mine. Ignore them, he said quietly. They don't know anything. But inside my stomach was churning. So many people. So many eyes watching me. Judging me. Deciding whether I was worth saving. Then I saw him. Reverend Whitmore stood near the front in his black preacher suit, looking every inch the respectable man of God. Beside him was Mrs. Harriet Price, dressed in mourning black, her face arranged in an expression of pious concern. When Whitmore's eyes met mine, he smiled. A cold, calculating smile that made every instinct scream danger. That's when I noticed Sarah had gone rigid beside me. "What's wrong?" I whispered. But she couldn't answer. She was staring at Mrs. Price with an expression of absolute terror. Martha noticed too. "Sarah. Honey, what is it?" Sarah managed to whisper. "Mrs. Price. I know where the girls went." Before anyone could ask what she meant, the bailiff called for order. Judge Abraham Stone entered the courtroom, a stern-looking man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The hearing began with Whitmore's lawyer, a slick man from Helena named Patterson. He painted a picture of Nate as a well-intentioned but misguided bachelor who'd acted impulsively without understanding the proper channels for child placement. This child was removed from proper care without authorization. Patterson's voice rang with practiced outrage. Mr. Holloway, however well-intentioned, circumvented established procedures designed to protect vulnerable children. The orphanage system exists for a reason. William Hart stood to object. The auction at which Mr. Holloway acquired custody has been conducted annually for 15 years without challenge from Reverend Whitmore. Because I trusted that good families would step forward, Whitmore's voice was full of false sincerity. I never imagined a single man with no experience would attempt to raise a young girl alone. Judge Stone held up a hand. "Reverend Whitmore, you'll have your chance to testify." "Continue, Mr. Patterson." Patterson laid out his case methodically. Nate's isolation. His lack of family. The absence of a proper maternal influence. He painted a picture of a lonely bachelor playing at fatherhood with a child who deserved better. "And what does better look like?" William asked during cross-examination. "The orphanage where she was beaten. The system that was preparing to sell her to the highest bidder." "Objection," Patterson said. "Inflammatory." "I'll allow it." Judge Stone's eyes were sharp. "Answer the question, Reverend." Whitmore's smile stayed fixed, but his eyes turned cold. "I have no knowledge of any mistreatment. The orphanage follows all established guidelines for child welfare." "Then how do you explain this?" William handed the judge a document. Judge Stone read it, and his face went gray. 15 documented instances of beating. William continued. Scars consistent with whipping. Bruises in various stages of healing. All sustained before Mr. Holloway took custody. "Children fall," Patterson interjected quickly. "They play roughly. On their backs with marks that match a belt or strap." William's voice cut like a blade. "These aren't playground injuries, Your Honor. This is systematic abuse." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Stone banged his gavel. "Order. I will have order." When the room quieted, Stone turned to Whitmore. "Reverend, do you have any explanation for these injuries?" "The child came to us already damaged." Whitmore's voice dripped with false concern. Her mother was negligent, her circumstances dire. We did our best to rehabilitate her, but some damage cannot be undone. That's a lie. Every head turned. Sarah had stood up, her whole body shaking but her voice clear. That's a lie, and he knows it. Young woman, this is highly irregular, Patterson started. Let her speak. Judge Stone's eyes were fixed on Sarah. Who are you? Sarah Miller. She walked forward, her voice growing stronger with each step. I spent 6 years in Reverend Whitmore's care. The courtroom exploded in whispers again. Stone banged his gavel, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. Continue, he said. I know what happens in that orphanage. Sarah's voice rang through the courtroom. I know about the beatings, the starvation, the children who disappear. Disappear. Stone leaned forward. Sold to families who don't want children, Sarah said. They want workers, servants. Her gaze locked onto Harriet Price, who had gone deathly pale. Or worse. This is outrageous. Whitmore surged to his feet. This girl is clearly disturbed. I have names. Sarah didn't flinch. Mary Collins, sold to a Helena buyer at age 7. Last seen working in a brothel on 3rd Street. Catherine Moore, taken by Mrs. Price at age 9. Never heard from again. Thomas Reed, 8 years old, purchased by the Copper Crown Mining Company. Died in a cave-in 6 months later. The courtroom was in chaos now. People shouting. Women crying. Stone pounding his gavel so hard I thought it might break. Order. His voice finally cut through the noise. I will have order in this court. When silence finally fell, Stone's face was like thunder. Reverend Whitmore, Mrs. Price, you will remain in this courthouse when proceedings conclude. Sheriff, see that they don't leave. Whitmore's face had gone the color of ash. Mrs. Price looked like she might faint. Your Honor, Patterson tried one more time. These are unsubstantiated accusations. Then they can be investigated, Stone interrupted. In the meantime, we have a custody matter to resolve. He turned his gaze to Nate. Mr. Holloway, I'd like to hear from you. Nate stood, and I could see his hands shaking slightly. What would you like to know, Your Honor? Why did you take this child? The question hung in the air. Nate looked at me, sitting between Martha and Sarah, clutching biscuit to my chest. Then he turned back to the judge. Because she was standing on that platform and nobody wanted her. His voice came out rough. Because I know what it's like to feel that way. To believe you're not worth fighting for. You're a wealthy man, Mr. Holloway, Stone said. A respected rancher. Surely you've never. My wife died 4 years ago, Nate interrupted. My son 3 days later. The words seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. I spent 4 years convinced that caring about anyone was a death sentence. That it was safer to be alone. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter but somehow stronger. Then I saw Rosie. Saw her standing there with nothing but a broken toy and broken faith, waiting for someone to tell her she mattered. And I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let her believe the lie that she wasn't worth saving. And are you equipped to raise her? Don't ask. A single man with no experience. No, the honesty seemed to surprise everyone. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I mess up constantly. But I love her. And I will spend every day of my life trying to be what she needs. My small voice cut through the courtroom. I had slipped away from Martha and was standing in the aisle, tears streaming down my face. Papa, I want to say something. Stone leaned forward. Child, this is a courtroom. These are adult proceedings. Please, my voice broke. Please let me talk. The judge studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Very well. I walked forward, so small among all these adults, so fragile looking. But my voice was steady when I spoke. The bad man says I need a proper family. I looked at Whitmore, and something fierce flashed in my eyes. A mama and a papa and a nice house. But I had those things at his orphanage. I had a bed and food sometimes and other kids. And they still hurt me. I turned to the judge. Papa Nate never hurts me. He reads me stories. He lets me name the baby horses. He stays with me when I have bad dreams, even when he's tired. My small hands clenched at my sides. He chose me when nobody else would. And I choose him back. The silence that followed was absolute. That's stone cleared his throat. That's quite a statement, young lady. I mean it, my chin lifted. If you send me back to the bad man, I'll run away. I'll run and run until I find Papa again. Because he's my family now, and nobody gets to take that away. I walked back to Nate and wrapped my arms around his leg, holding on like I'd never let go. Judge Stone was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. In 20 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such courage from one so young. He looked at Whitmore, then at Mrs. Price, then back at Nate and me. And rarely seen such darkness masquerading as righteousness. He picked up his gavel. It is the ruling of this court that Rosie remains in the custody of Nathaniel Holloway, effective immediately and permanently. The gavel came down like thunder. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the operations of the Silver Creek Orphanage and the activities of Reverend Samuel Whitmore and Mrs. Harriet Price. This court is adjourned. Chaos erupted. People shouting, crying, rushing forward. Whitmore tried to flee and was stopped by the sheriff. Mrs. Price collapsed into her seat, sobbing. But I heard none of it. Nate had dropped to his knees and gathered me into his arms, holding me so tight I could feel his heart racing against mine. We won, I whispered. We really won. We really won, sweetheart. I get to stay forever. Forever, he pulled back, his face wet with tears. Forever and always. Around us, the world continued its chaos. Justice being served. Villains being led away. A community reckoning with horrors it had ignored for too long. But in that moment, none of it mattered. A father had fought for his daughter. A daughter had found her voice. And a family, forged not from blood but from choice, had won the right to exist. The days after the hearing felt like waking from a nightmare into a dream I was still afraid would end. Whitmore was arrested before he could leave the courthouse, led away in chains while half the town watched in stunned silence. Mrs. Harriet Price followed within the hour, her black dress trailing behind her like a funeral shroud as the sheriff escorted her to a cell. The investigation moved quickly once it started. The sheriff, facing his own scrutiny for turning a blind eye for so many years, suddenly became very cooperative. Records appeared that he'd previously claimed didn't exist. Witnesses came forward who'd been too afraid to speak before. The whole rotten structure that Whitmore had built began to collapse like a house of cards. 7 children were recovered from Mrs. Price's household within 2 days. All of them malnourished. All of them bearing scars similar to mine. The youngest was 4 years old. The oldest was 12 and couldn't remember ever being called by her real name. She'd been Catherine for so long, she'd forgotten she was born Emma. I watched from the ranch as wagons brought the children to temporary housing with families Dr. Grant had vetted. Sarah stayed to help, her own trauma making her uniquely qualified to comfort these broken souls. I wanted to help too, but Nate and Martha insisted I needed time to simply be a child, to heal without taking on the weight of others' pain. But I couldn't stop thinking about them. About how easily I could have been one of those nameless girls working in Mrs. Price's house. About how close I'd come to disappearing entirely. Papa, I asked one night as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. What's going to happen to them? The other children. Nate was quiet for a moment. Families are being found, he said. Real families this time. People who actually want children, not workers. Dr. Grant and William are making sure of it. But what if nobody wants them? What if they're like me and Sarah? Too damaged. Nate turned to look at me, his expression fierce. You're not damaged, Rosie. Neither is Sarah. Neither are those children. What was done to you was damage, yes. But you are not the damage. You're the survivor. There's a difference. I considered this. Then how come it feels like the bad parts are inside me? Like they're part of who I am now? Because trauma changes us, Nate said honestly. It becomes part of our story. But it doesn't get to write the ending. We do. 3 weeks after the hearing, William Hart came to the ranch with news. His face was grim as he sat at our kitchen table, and I knew before he spoke that something was wrong. Whitmore escaped. The words fell into silence like stones into still water. Nate went very still. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. I felt my whole body go cold. How? Nate's voice was dangerously quiet. Had help from inside the jail, William said. Deputy Morrison has disappeared too. They think he helped Whitmore get out and then ran with him. Where are they now? Nobody knows. William met Nate's eyes. But there's talk. Rumors that Whitmore is coming back for revenge against the people who exposed him. Against the children who testified. Martha's voice was barely audible. Against Rosie. The world tilted. Everything I'd thought was safe was over, was behind me. Suddenly loomed large and terrifying again. He was out there. The monster was free. And he was coming for me. We're leaving. Nate stood up so fast his chair crashed backward. Martha, pack bags for you and Rosie. Jake, I need every man you can spare, armed and ready. Where are we going? Asked, my voice small. Helena. Nate was already moving, grabbing his rifle from above the fireplace. We'll stay with William's family until Whitmore is recaptured. But the ranch. The ranch will be fine. Nate crouched down, took my shoulders gently. Right now, all that matters is keeping you safe. We loaded into the wagon within the hour. Me, Nate, Martha, and 4 armed ranch hands. The plan was to get to Helena, hole up somewhere safe, wait for the law to do its job. We barely made it past the ranch gates. The shot came from nowhere, a crack that split the air. One of the horses screamed and went down. The wagon lurched violently, tilted. I heard Nate shout something, felt his body slam into mine, driving me down to the wagon floor. Get down. His weight pressed over me, shielding me. More shots cracked through the air. Chaos erupted around us. Men yelling, horses panicking. And somewhere in the midst of it all, a voice I recognized. You thought you could destroy me. Whitmore's voice was ragged, half mad. You thought you could take everything I built and walk away. Through the gaps in the wagon boards, I could see him. He stood 30 yards away, flanked by 2 men with rifles. His clothes were dirty, his hair wild. He looked nothing like the polished preacher who'd stood in the courthouse. He looked like what he'd always been underneath. Monster. Let the women and children go, Nate called out. His body still covering mine. This is between you and me. No, Whitmore's laugh was unhinged. This is between me and everyone who betrayed me. Starting with that little demon you've been harboring. The gun swung toward the wagon. Heard me. I felt Nate's whole body tense. Then he moved. Later I wouldn't remember all the details. The way he'd lifted me and thrown me toward Martha. The bullet that grazed his shoulder, leaving a trail of red. The tackle that brought Whitmore down. The struggle in the dirt. 2 men fighting for the right to decide a child's future. What I would remember was my own voice, screaming. Mpa. The sound of another shot. Then silence. When I looked up, Whitmore was on the ground, unmoving. Jake stood over him, rifle smoking. And Nate was pushing himself up, blood streaming from his shoulder. His eyes searching frantically. Rosie. His voice cracked. Rosie, where are you? I'm here. I was in Martha's arms, but I fought free and ran to him. Papa, you're bleeding. It's just a scratch. He caught me, held me tight. I'm okay. We're okay. But we weren't okay. Not really. Because even though Whitmore was dead, even though the immediate threat was gone, something had broken inside me. The safety I'd been building, the trust, the belief that bad things were behind me, all of it shattered in the space of a heartbeat. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Whitmore's gun swinging toward me. Heard his voice calling me a demon. Felt the terror of knowing I was about to die. I found Nate in his room, his shoulder bandaged, staring at the ceiling. Can't sleep either. He asked when I appeared in the doorway. I shook my head. Come here. He pulled back the covers. I climbed into bed beside him, careful of his injured shoulder. We lay in silence for a while. He came back. I finally whispered. You said he couldn't, but he did. What if there are more bad men? What if they keep coming? There are no more bad men, Nate said firmly. Whitmore is gone. Really gone this time. And Mrs. Price is in jail. The deputy who helped them escape has been caught. It's over, sweetheart. It's really over. You promised before, I said, my voice breaking. And that promise almost got us both killed. I know, Nate's voice was thick with emotion. And I'm sorry. I was wrong to promise something I couldn't control. But I can promise you this. I will always fight for you. I will always protect you. And I will never, ever stop loving you. Even when I'm scared and clingy and wake you up every night. Especially then, he said. Because that's when you need me most. Slowly, painfully, the terror began to recede. Not all at once. Not cleanly. But gradually, over the weeks that followed, I started to believe again that I was safe. That the nightmare was truly over. The scars on Nate's shoulder healed. The other children from Whitmore's orphanage found permanent homes. Sarah decided to stay in Silver Creek, working with Dr. Grant to help traumatized children. And I, slowly but surely, started to learn how to be a normal child. But normal came with its own challenges. Martha enrolled me in school that fall. I was 4 years old, small for my age, and so far behind the other children academically it was embarrassing. I could barely write my name. I didn't know my numbers past 10. And I'd never been around other children my age who weren't also traumatized orphans. The first day was a disaster. I spent the entire morning hiding under my desk, too afraid to speak. When the teacher, Miss Caroline, tried to coax me out, I bit her. Nate got called to the school. I sat in the corner of Miss Caroline's classroom, shame burning in my chest, waiting for him to be angry, waiting for punishment. But when he arrived, he just crouched down beside me and asked, "What happened?" "Too many people," I whispered. "Too much noise." "Got scared." "Did you tell Miss Caroline you were scared?" I shook my head. "Did you ask for help?" Another shake. Nate sighed. "Rosie, you can't bite people when you're scared. That's not okay. But I understand why you did it. Let's figure out a better way." What followed were months of patient work. Miss Caroline, bless her heart, worked with Nate and Martha to create a plan. I could sit in the back of the classroom where I felt safer. I could take breaks when things got overwhelming. I could bring Biscuit to school for comfort. And slowly, so slowly, I started to learn. Not just reading and writing and arithmetic, but how to be around other children. How to play. How to laugh without fear. How to trust that the world held more kindness than cruelty. Tommy helped with that. He appointed himself my protector at school, glaring at anyone who looked at me wrong. When Billy Harper called me damaged goods in the schoolyard, Tommy punched him in the nose. Both boys got in trouble, but Tommy just grinned and said it was worth it. By my 5th birthday, I'd made real progress. I could read simple books. I could count to 100. I had friends, actual friends, who came to my birthday party and brought presents and played games that didn't involve fear or survival. But the biggest change came from something unexpected. One evening, about 6 months after Whitmore's death, Nate sat me down in his office. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling out a folder of papers. "What is it?" "Business documents," he said. "For the ranch and for some other things I've been working on." Frowned, confused. "Why are you showing me?" "Because you're my daughter," Nate said simply. "And someday, all of this will be yours. I want you to start learning how it works." "I'm only 5, I pointed out. "I know," he smiled. "But you're smart, Rosie. Smarter than you give yourself credit for. And I think you might have a head for this kind of thing." Over the next months, Nate started teaching me about the ranch. How many horses we had. How much feed they needed. What it cost to run the operation. Where the money came from and where it went. I didn't understand most of it at first. But I liked sitting in his office, watching him work, learning the language of business and responsibility. And I liked feeling useful. Like I was contributing something beyond just being saved. But there was something else in that folder. Something Nate didn't show me right away. Papers about a new company he was forming. Sterling Industries. It was going to buy and sell horses at first, he explained. But eventually it might grow into something bigger. Why Sterling? Yes. It was my mother's maiden name, Nate said. She always said it meant something valuable. Something worth keeping. Like me. Yes. Exactly like you, he said. And his smile was sad and proud all at once. I didn't know then what Sterling Industries would become. Didn't know that Nate was building not just a company, but a legacy. Something that would outlast him. Something that would eventually change thousands of lives. All I knew was that my father was teaching me to think beyond survival, beyond fear. He was teaching me to build, to create, to imagine a future where I wasn't just a victim of my past, but an architect of what came next. And that gift, that vision would shape everything that followed. Would lead me from that ranch in Montana to boardrooms in New York. From an unwanted orphan to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire. From a broken little girl clutching a torn teddy bear to a woman who could stand in front of federal agents and executives and say with absolute certainty, "I'm Nathaniel Holloway's daughter." But first I had to finish growing up. And that journey was just beginning. The years that followed were the best of my life, though I didn't realize it at the time. When you're living through happiness, you don't always recognize it as such. You're too busy existing in it, breathing it in like air, taking it for granted the way children take sunlight for granted. Grew. Not just physically, though I did that too, finally putting on weight, filling out, losing the skeletal fragility that had defined my early years. But I grew in other ways. In confidence. In knowledge. In the quiet certainty that I belonged somewhere. School became easier as I caught up with the other children. By age 7, I was reading at a level far beyond my peers. By age 9, I was helping younger students with their lessons. Miss Caroline said I had a gift for explaining complicated things in simple ways, a skill that would serve me well later in life. But my real education happened at home, in Nate's office, learning the ins and outs of running Sterling Industries. What had started as a horse trading business had expanded into cattle, then land acquisition, then investments in railroad stock and mining operations. Nate had a genius for seeing opportunities before others did, for understanding how different industries connected and supported each other. And he taught me everything. Not because he expected me to take over someday, though I think part of him hoped I would, but because he believed knowledge was power. That understanding how money worked, how business worked, how the world worked, would protect me in ways nothing else could. You're going to be a woman in a man's world, he told me when I was 10, sitting across from his desk while he explained profit margins and operating costs. That's already 2 strikes against you. Add in your past, and some people will always see you as less than, as damaged, as not good enough. His eyes met mine, fierce and certain. So you're going to have to be better than them. Smarter, tougher, more prepared. Not because it's fair, it's not fair, but because that's how you survive. That's how you win. I took those words to heart. Threw myself into learning with a hunger that sometimes worried Martha. She'd find me in Nate's office at midnight, reading contracts by lamplight. She'd have to drag me away from ledgers to eat dinner. "Child, you're going to burn yourself out," she'd scold. "There's more to life than business." But I couldn't explain to her what I barely understood myself. That learning, understanding, mastering these skills made me feel safe. That knowledge was armor against a world that had tried to destroy me. That every piece of information I absorbed was proof I was worth something beyond the damaged goods label Whitmore had given me. Tommy understood, though. He'd grown into a lanky teenager, all elbows and bad jokes, but with a heart as big as Montana. He'd ride over from his parents' farm most weekends, and we'd spend hours in the barn talking about everything and nothing. "You know you don't have to prove anything, right?" he said once, when I was 12 and stressing over a mathematics problem Nate had given me. "You're already enough, Rosie. Just as you are." "I know that," I lied. "No, you don't." Tommy's voice was gentle. "You think if you stop achieving, stop being useful, people will realize you're not worth keeping. But that's not how love works." The words hit too close to home. I changed the subject. But Tommy was right, of course. Despite years of safety and love, despite Nate and Martha proving day after day that they wanted me, some part of me still lived in fear of being sent back. Of being told it was all a mistake. That I wasn't actually worth saving after all. That fear drove me. made me work harder, study longer, push myself beyond what was healthy. And Nate, seeing the pattern, tried to intervene. On my 13th birthday, instead of the business books I'd expected, he gave me a horse. Not a foal, but a full-grown mare, chestnut with a white blaze down her face. Her name is Liberty, Nate said, leading me to the corral. And she's yours. No strings attached. No work required. Just yours because I love you and want you to have something that brings you joy instead of stress. I stood there, stunned, looking at this beautiful animal. I can't accept this, I said. Too much. Rosie, Nate turned me to face him. When are you going to understand? You don't have to earn my love. You don't have to prove your worth. You just have to be you. That's all I've ever wanted. That's all I'll ever want. For the first time in years, I let myself cry. Really cry. Not from fear or pain, but from the overwhelming realization that I was loved. Truly, unconditionally loved. Not for what I could do or achieve or become, but simply because I existed. I rode Liberty every day after that. And slowly, I started to understand what Nate had been trying to teach me. That rest wasn't weakness. That joy wasn't frivolous. That being a whole person meant more than being a useful one. But life has a way of testing the lessons you think you've learned. When I was 15, Nate collapsed in his office. One minute he was explaining quarterly projections, the next he was on the floor, clutching his chest, his face gray with pain. Dr. Grant said it was his heart. That years of stress and grief from losing his first family, combined with a constant worry of protecting me, had taken their toll. He needed rest, she said. Complete rest. No work for at least 6 months, which meant someone had to run Sterling Industries. And that someone, Nate insisted, was me. You're 15, Martha argued. This is ridiculous. Hire a manager. I trust Rosie, Nate said from his bed, where Dr. Grant had ordered him to stay. She knows the business as well as I do. Better in some ways. She'll be fine. I will not be fine, I said, panic rising in my throat. Papa, I can't do this. I'm a child. You stopped being a child the day you stood in that courtroom and told a judge you wouldn't be sent back, Nate said. You've got this, Rosie. I know you do. So at 15 years old, with Martha's reluctant support and the deep skepticism of every man who worked for Sterling Industries, I took over running a company worth millions of dollars. The first month was hell. The foreman openly laughed when I tried to give orders. Suppliers assumed I was Nate's secretary and refused to negotiate with me. Business partners showed up expecting to talk to a man and barely concealed their disgust when they found a teenage girl instead. But I'd learned from the best. And more than that, I'd survived worse. Men who looked at me with contempt were nothing compared to Reverend Whitmore. Negotiations that went sideways were nothing compared to beatings in dark rooms. I'd faced down monsters. Business sharks were easy by comparison. Slowly I started to win them over. Not through charm, I didn't have any. Not through being pleasant, I wasn't. But through being right. Through knowing the numbers better than they did. Through making decisions that increased profits and proved I wasn't just playing at this. By month 3, the foreman stopped laughing. By month 6, suppliers were calling me directly. And by the time Nate was well enough to return to work, Sterling Industries was more profitable than it had ever been. I expected him to take the reins back. Instead, he made me co-owner, equal partner. At 16 years old, I owned half of one of the most successful companies in Montana. The town had opinions about that, of course. Always did. Half thought Nate was crazy, giving a girl that kind of power. The other half thought I'd manipulated him somehow, used my past trauma to guilt him into it. Let them talk, Nate said when I expressed concern. You earned this. Every penny, every share. And anyone who can't see that is too blind to matter. But it did matter. Because the whispers followed me everywhere. To church, where women clutched their pearls and wondered what kind of example I was setting. To town meetings, where men dismissed my input because I was too young, too female, too damaged to possibly understand real business. And to school, where my former friends started treating me differently. Like I thought I was better than them. Like money and power had changed who I was. Only Tommy stood by me through all of it. "You're the same Rosie you've always been," he said when I cried on his shoulder after a particularly brutal day. "They're just scared because you're everything they said you couldn't be." "What's that?" "Successful," he said simply. "Happy. Free." The irony was that I didn't feel free. The bigger Sterling Industries grew, the more I felt trapped by it. Trapped by expectations and responsibilities and the constant need to prove I deserved what I had. When I turned 18, Nate suggested I go east for college. "You could study business," he said. "Maybe law. Come back with credentials that'll shut up every idiot who thinks you don't belong." "I don't want to leave you," I said. "What if something happens while I'm gone?" "Rosie, I'll be fine. And you need this. Need to see that there's a whole world beyond Silver Creek. Beyond the ranch and the company and everything we've built here." So I went. Enrolled in a women's college in Massachusetts, one of the few that would accept someone like me. Someone with money but no proper pedigree. Someone whose past included orphanages and auctions and scars that showed when I changed clothes in the dormitory. The other girls didn't know what to make of me. I was too Western, too rough, too serious. While they attended parties and worried about finding husbands, I buried myself in business law and economics. While they wrote letters home asking for money, I was sending money back to help Nate expand operations. I didn't fit in. Didn't particularly try to. I was there to learn, not to make friends. And learn I did. Soaked up knowledge like a sponge, proving again and again that I belonged in those classrooms even if I didn't belong in those social circles. But in my second year something happened that would change everything. A professor, Dr. Catherine Mills, pulled me aside after class. "Miss Holloway," she said, "I've been reviewing your work. You have a remarkable mind for corporate structure and finance." "Thank you," I said, waiting for the but. "Have you considered what you want to do after graduation?" "Go home," I said immediately. "Help my father run Sterling Industries." Dr. Mills looked at me for a long moment. "What if I told you there was another option? What if I said you could do more than just run one company? What if you could change the way companies operate? Make them better for the people who work in them?" "I don't understand." "I'm working with a group of reformers," Dr. Mills explained. "We're trying to change labor laws. Improve working conditions. Stop companies from exploiting their workers the way you were exploited as a child." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd never connected my past to the broader world of corporate exploitation. Never thought about how the system that had allowed Whitmore to sell children was the same system that allowed companies to work men to death in mines or lock women in factories or pay starvation wages for backbreaking labor. "Tell me more," I said. What followed was an education beyond anything the classroom offered. Dr. Mills introduced me to activists, journalists, former workers who'd been maimed by unsafe conditions and then discarded. I heard stories that echoed my own. Different details, same fundamental evil. People treated as disposable, as means to profit rather than ends in themselves. And I realized something. Sterling Industries, for all Nate's good intentions, wasn't that different. We paid fair wages, yes. We didn't abuse our workers. But we also didn't do anything to challenge a system that allowed abuse to flourish elsewhere. I went home that summer with a fire in my belly and a mission forming in my mind. Nate listened as I explained what I'd learned, what I'd seen, what I wanted to change. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You want to turn Sterling Industries into something more than a business?" "I want to make it mean something," I corrected. "Want it to prove that you can be profitable and ethical. That you don't have to exploit people to succeed. Some people will say that's naive. Some people said you were crazy for adopting me," I pointed out. "How'd that turn out?" Nate smiled, that proud, sad smile I'd come to know so well. "All right," he said. "Let's do it. Let's build something worth being proud of." And that's exactly what we did. Over the next 5 years, Sterling Industries became a model for ethical business practices. We paid workers above market rates. We built schools for their children. We established safety standards that went beyond legal requirements. We proved that caring about people and making profit weren't mutually exclusive. Other companies hated us for it. Called us communists, bleeding hearts, fools who'd bankrupt ourselves with kindness. But our workers were loyal, productive, innovative. Our reputation attracted the best talent. And our profits continued to grow. By the time I graduated from college at 22, Sterling Industries had expanded beyond Montana. We had operations in 5 states, employed over 2,000 people, and were worth more than $20 million. And I was miserable. Because success, I'd learned, came with a price I hadn't anticipated. The bigger Sterling Industries grew, the more enemies we made. Competitors who resented our ethical practices because they made their own exploitation look worse. Politicians who took bribes from those competitors and suddenly found reasons to investigate us. Journalists who wrote hit pieces claiming our worker benefits were a socialist plot to undermine American business. And through it all, Nate was getting weaker. His heart condition, supposedly managed, was getting worse. I could see it in the way he tired easily, the way he had to rest after climbing stairs, the way his face would go gray with pain he tried to hide. "Papa, you need to slow down," I told him when I was 23, finding him in his office at midnight going over expansion plans. "I'll slow down when I'm dead," he said, then caught himself. "Sorry. Bad joke." "Not funny." I sat down across from him. "I'm serious. Dr. Grant says you need rest. And I'll rest when I know you're settled. When I know Sterling Industries is secure. When I know you'll be taken care of after I'm gone." The words hung between us, the acknowledgement we'd both been avoiding. Nate was dying. Not tomorrow, maybe not even this year, but soon. And we both knew it. "I don't need taking care of," I said quietly. "You taught me how to do that myself." "I know." Nate reached across the desk and took my hand. "But let an old man worry anyway. It's one of the few pleasures I have left." Over the next year, Nate started preparing me for something I didn't understand at first. He introduced me to lawyers, accountants, business associates I'd never met. He took me to meetings in cities I'd never visited. He showed me parts of Sterling Industries I didn't know existed. "Why all the secrecy?" I asked after one particularly mysterious meeting in Chicago. "Not secrecy," Nate said. "Preparation. There are things about this company you need to know. Things I've been building toward for a long time." "What things?" But he wouldn't say. Just kept introducing me to people, making connections, building something I couldn't quite see the shape of yet. Then, 2 weeks before my 24th birthday, everything changed. Nate collapsed again. This time there was no recovery. Dr. Grant said it was a matter of days, maybe hours. I sat by his bedside in the ranch house, holding his hand, watching him struggle for each breath. Martha was there too, crying quietly in the corner. Tommy had ridden over as soon as he heard, standing silent vigil by the door. "Rosie," Nate's voice was weak but urgent. "Need to tell you something." "Don't talk," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Save your strength." "No time," he coughed, grimaced with pain. "Listen. The company. It's not what you think." "What do you mean?" "Sterling Industries, it's bigger than you know. I've been using it to fund something. A network. People working to shut down operations like Whitmore's. To protect children. Change laws." "Papa, I don't understand." "There are accounts," he gasped for breath. "Hidden accounts. Money set aside for this work. And when I'm gone, it all goes to you. Not just the company. The mission. The responsibility." His hand tightened on mine with surprising strength. "Promise me," he said. "Promise me you'll keep it going. That you'll use what I've built to protect children who can't protect themselves. That you'll make my life mean something beyond just making money." "I promise," I choked out. "Promise, Papa." He smiled then, a real smile despite the pain. "Good girl," he whispered. "My brave, brilliant girl. I knew the moment I saw you on that platform. I knew you were worth everything." Those were his last words. Nathaniel Holloway died at 3 in the morning on March 7th, with his daughter holding his hand and the weight of his legacy settling onto her shoulders like a crown made of thorns. The funeral was huge. People came from across the country to pay respects. Business partners, former workers, families whose children had been saved through the network Nate had built. I stood dry-eyed through all of it, numb with grief too big to process. But the numbness shattered when they read the will. Nate had left me everything. The ranch, Sterling Industries, and something else. A trust worth over $50 million, dedicated to child welfare reform. Money that had been quietly accumulated over 2 decades. Hidden in accounts across the country, waiting to be deployed. And there were instructions. Detailed plans for how to use Sterling Industries as a cover for activist work. Names of people in government who could be trusted or bribed or pressured into changing laws. A roadmap for turning a business empire into a force for systemic change. It was brilliant, insane, terrifying, and absolutely typical of the man who'd looked at an unwanted 3-year-old and decided she was worth saving. 4 weeks after the funeral, I locked myself in Nate's office and read through everything he'd left me. The scope of what he'd built was staggering. Over the past 15 years, his network had shut down 17 orphanages operating like Whitmore's, had rescued over 200 children from trafficking situations, had lobbied for and passed child labor laws in 6 states. And he'd done it all quietly, using Sterling Industries' profits to fund the work while maintaining the appearance of being just another business. Nobody knew, not even me, till now. The question was what to do with it. I was 24 years old, running a multi-million-dollar company, and apparently also inheriting a secret activist network. It was absurd, impossible, exactly the kind of thing Nate would do. So I did what he'd taught me. I made a plan. If Sterling Industries was going to be a force for change, it needed to be bigger, more influential, more powerful, which meant expansion. Aggressive expansion. Over the next 3 years, I transformed Sterling Industries from a regional company into a national one. We acquired smaller businesses, absorbed competitors, diversified into new industries. Railroads, telegraph lines, manufacturing, banking. Every acquisition was strategic, chosen to either increase our influence or provide resources for the hidden work. And I was ruthless about it. Had to be. Men don't take orders from young women unless those women prove themselves harder, smarter, more capable than any man in the room. So I became that woman. Cut deals that left veteran businessmen shaking their heads. Made investments that seemed crazy until they paid off spectacularly. Built a reputation as someone you didn't cross unless you wanted to be destroyed. The press called me the Ice Queen of Industry. Ruthless, cold, unnatural. Everything a woman shouldn't be. I wore the labels like armor and kept building. But the higher I climbed, the more enemies I made. And one of those enemies was Robert Harrison. Harrison had been with Sterling Industries since before I was born. Had worked his way up from ranch hand to executive through 30 years of loyal service. And he hated me with every fiber of his being. He hid it well at first. Played the dutiful subordinate while undermining me at every turn. Spreading rumors about my competence. Sabotaging deals. Slow-walking initiatives I cared about. I knew what he was doing but couldn't prove it. And I couldn't fire him without cause. Not without looking like the irrational woman everyone expected me to be. So I watched, waited, and investigated. Because if 30 years had taught me anything, it was that patient men who smile while stabbing you in the back always make mistakes eventually. Harrison's mistake came 3 years after Nate's death. I discovered discrepancies in our accounting. Money missing from accounts Harrison controlled. Not huge amounts, nothing that would trigger audits, but consistent. Regular. A pattern of theft going back years. I brought it to William Hart, who'd become Sterling Industries' chief legal counsel. He investigated and found more. Harrison had been embezzling for over a decade. Had stolen nearly $2 million. And worse, he'd been selling information to competitors. Sabotaging our ethical initiatives because they threatened the traditional business model he believed in. We could go to the authorities now, William said. Have him arrested. But I had a better idea. A more poetic one. Because around that same time, Sterling Industries was approaching a critical juncture. We were big enough to go public. To sell shares and become a corporation worth potentially hundreds of millions. And I'd been thinking about succession. about who would run the company after me, about how to ensure Nate's legacy continued. That's when I realized something. I didn't need to have children of my own to pass this on. Didn't need to find a husband or build a traditional family. I could do something better. Something that honored where I came from. I could find another unwanted child and give them what Nate gave me. Chance, purpose, legacy. So I started looking. And I found her. Emily Chin, 19 years old. Former foster kid who'd aged out of the system with nothing. Working 3 jobs to put herself through community college. Brilliant mind for business but no connections, no opportunities, no reason for anyone to take a chance on her. Except I saw myself in her. Saw the hunger, the determination, the absolute refusal to let her circumstances define her. I hired her as an intern. Paid her more than any intern had ever made and told her exactly why. Because I believe in you, I said. Because someone once believed in me. Because this is how we change the world, one saved life at a time. Emily thought I was crazy. But she worked harder than anyone I'd ever seen. Learned faster. Asked better questions. And within 6 months, I knew I'd found what I was looking for. My successor. My legacy. The proof that Nate's faith in broken things wasn't misplaced. I spent the next year training her. Teaching her everything Nate had taught me. And more. How to navigate a world that would see her race and gender and background as weaknesses. How to turn those perceived weaknesses into strengths. How to build power and then use it to protect people who had none. And I told her about the network. About the hidden work. About the real purpose of Sterling Industries. She cried when I explained it. This whole time, she said. You've been using capitalism to fight capitalism. Exactly, I said. Money is power. And power used right can change everything. Which brought me to the board meeting. To the moment I'd been building toward for 5 years. Sterling Industries was going public. I was stepping down as CEO. And I was naming Emily Chen as my successor. The board lost their minds, of course. Harrison worst of all. But I'd prepared for this. Had votes lined up. Had evidence of Harrison's crimes ready to deploy at exactly the right moment. And I had one more card to play. The truth. About who I was. Where I came from. What this company really meant. So when Harrison slammed his fist on the table and called my decision an insult, when he demanded the board reject Emily's appointment, when he threatened shareholder revolts and corporate collapse, I let him finish. Then I nodded to William. The federal agents entered. Harrison's face went white as they read him his rights. Fraud. Embezzlement. Conspiracy. And in that moment of chaos, I stood up and said 5 words that silenced the room. I'm Nathaniel Holloway's daughter. Then I told them everything. The auction. The abuse. The rescue. The network. The real mission of Sterling Industries. 25 years of secrets laid bare in 15 minutes. When I finished, half the board was in tears. The other half looked shell-shocked. And Emily, my brilliant, beautiful successor, looked at me with something like awe. This is what we're really building, I said. Not just a company. Movement. A proof that business can be a force for good. That profit and ethics aren't enemies. That broken people can build something beautiful. I looked around the table at faces I'd worked with for years. Some believed in the mission. Some just wanted profit. But all of them now knew the truth. Sterling Industries belongs to someone who came from nothing, I said. Someone who understands what it means to be discarded and knows exactly why that's wrong. Emily will run this company. And she'll do it better than I ever could. Because she's hungry in ways none of you can understand. And that hunger is going to change the world. The vote was unanimous. Emily became CEO of Sterling Industries. And I, for the first time since Nate's death, felt like I could breathe. Because I'd kept my promise. Had used what Nate built to protect children, change laws, fight systems of exploitation. Had taken his legacy and expanded it beyond anything he could have imagined. And I'd passed it on. To someone who would protect it. Grow it. Keep the mission alive long after I was gone. That night, I went back to the ranch for the first time in months. Stood on the porch where Nate and I used to watch sunsets. Felt his presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. "I did it, Papa," I whispered to the wind. "Built something worth being proud of. Something that matters." And somewhere I knew he was smiling. Knew he was proud. Knew that the 3-year-old girl standing on an auction platform with bleeding feet and a broken teddy bear had become exactly who she was meant to be. Not in spite of her trauma. Not by overcoming it. But by using it. By letting her pain fuel her purpose. By turning damage into determination and scars into strength. I was Nathaniel Holloway's daughter. Not by blood but by choice. And I would spend the rest of my life proving that choice meant everything. The epilogue came 5 years later. Emily had grown Sterling Industries into a $100 billion empire. The network had helped thousands of children. Laws had changed. Systems had shifted. And I finally had learned to rest. I was back at the ranch full-time now, older and tired but content. Tommy, who'd never married anyone but his horses, still rode over most weekends. We'd sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing, the way we had when we were children. "You did good, Rosie," he said one evening. "Nate would be proud." "Hope so," I said. "I know so," Tommy smiled. "You took what he gave you and multiplied it. That's what love does. Grows." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains Nate had loved. And for the first time in my life I felt truly at peace. Because I'd learned the lesson Nate spent his whole life trying to teach me. That worth isn't earned. It's inherent. That love isn't conditional. It's chosen. And that broken things, given enough care and time and faith, can become beautiful. I was nobody's victim anymore. I was a survivor, fighter, a builder of legacies. And most importantly, I was exactly enough just as I was. Nathaniel Holloway had looked at me on that auction platform and decided I was worth saving. And I'd spent my whole life proving him right. Not by being perfect, not by never failing, but by choosing every single day to use what I'd been given to make the world a little bit better. That was his legacy. Mine. And Emily's. And every person who came after us who chose to see the unwanted and decide they were worth everything. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ended with purpose. With meaning. With the knowledge that pain can be transformed into power, and power can be used to protect. And that, in the end, was worth more than any fairy tale could ever be.